Hello viewers, welcome to Study with Master Notes. Again we are back now. Hope all of you will be fine and many more. All the best for your upcoming exams, NET exams and your torment exams. So today we will go to discuss the reading the test unit 7 block 2 of MEG 6 American literature. So today I will describe the reading the test of the Nathaniel Hawthorne Scarlet letter. Okay, previously I have described block 2 unit 6. All of you go through my discussion box so that you will find all the videos of my playlist. Please push the bell icon to get the earliest notification, and please like, share and subscribe and comment me if any doubt, then I will definitely clear your doubt. Thank you. Okay, we will read the reading the test unit 7, that is the Scarlet letter of Nathaniel Hawthorne. Okay, what is the structure, what are the objectives, introduction, the threshold of the narrative, complications, a turning point, temptation in the forest towards the climax. Let us sum up questions and suggested reading. So detail I will tell. What is the reading of the test, what is the objective, introduction, the threshold of the narrative, complications, a turning point, temptation in the forest towards the climax. Let us sum up questions and suggested reading. So what are the objectives? Our primary objective in this unit is to give you an idea of the unfolding narrative in the Scarlet letter. It has to be noted that the threshold of the narrative shows Hester Prynne, the fallen woman, alone at the scaffold of the pillory in the market in Boston with her infant, and the climax shows Arthur Dimmesdale, the guilty priest, urging Hester to join him at the same scaffold along with her 7-year-old daughter Paul. So here are the characters of the plot. Okay, the character of the narrative. So who are they? Who are they in the Scarlet letter? So detailed description in the character already we have a block or unit, so I will discuss in my next video. So here I will discuss only reading the test overally. Okay, our primary objective in this unit is to give you an idea of the unfolding narrative. Okay, unfolding narrative. What do you mean by unfolding narrative? Unfolding narrative means some unspoken truth about the story. Okay, here it is the main key point. Unfolding narrative means unfolded or unspoken truth about the narrative. Okay, so it has to be noted that the threshold of the narrative shows Hester Prynne, the fallen woman. Okay, it has to be noted that the threshold of the narrative. Okay, so what is the threshold of the narrative? So see, it has to be noted that the threshold of the narrative shows Hester Prynne, the fallen woman. So there is a fallen woman in the narrative. So her name is Hester Prynne. Okay, Hester, Hester, Prynne, Prynne, the fallen woman, alone at the scaffold of the pillory in the market in Boston. Okay, so where is the place? In Boston, that is America, alone at the scaffold of the pillory in the market in Boston. Okay, so what do you mean by scaffold? Scaffold means layer on layer. Okay, so what do you mean by scaffold? Scaffold means layer. Okay, so scaffold of the pillory in the market in Boston with her infant, and climax shows Arthur Dimmesdale, the guilty priest, urging Hester to join him. Okay, so the woman in the market in Boston with her infant. Okay, so she had a baby, and the climax shows that Arthur Dimmesdale, who was a guilty priest. Okay, who was a priest, that is a guilty priest who has some sin. Okay, so urging Hester to join him at the same scaffold along with her 7-year-old daughter Paul. Okay, Arthur Dimmesdale, who had a 7-year-old daughter named Paul, and he wanted to join Hester Prynne with her infant in the Boston market. Okay, so in the scaffold of pylori. Our purpose is to give you an idea of the various stages through which this change comes about. Okay, so our purpose is to give you an idea of the various stages through which this change comes about. So here is the introduction. After having written 2/3 of the romance The Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne took a pause and wrote an introduction or a background to the grim tale. Okay, so after having written 2/3 of the romance, so Nathaniel Hawthorne had written 2/3 of the romance and took a pause. Okay, see, he took a break and wrote an introduction or background to the grim tale. It was titled The Custom House and contained satirical portraits of fellow workers at the Salem Custom House from which he was dismissed. Okay, so it was titled The Custom House. He wrote The Custom House, that contained satirical portraits. What do you mean by satirical portraits? Satirical portraits means that is what do you mean by satirical portraits? Satirical portraits means here, okay, satirical portraits. The Custom House contains satirical portraits. Satirical portraits means some comments, okay, some bad comments, that is called satirical portraits of fellow workers at the Salem Custom House from which he was dismissed. Although he was shocked at his dismissal, it was not an unmitigated evil. It was also a sort of blessing because, freed from the routine of monotonous work and drudgery, he could devote himself completely to writing. Okay, so Nathaniel Hawthorne was at Custom House. Okay, so after that he was shocked after his dismissal. It was not an unmitigated evil. It was also a sort of blessing. Okay, he was dismissed and it was a blessing for him. It was not an unmitigated evil. It was also a sort of blessing because freed from the routine of monotonous work and drudgery. Okay, so he was freed from the routine of monotonous work and stress and drudgery. He could devote himself completely to writing, his true vocation. He wanted to be a writer, so he could devote himself completely to writing, his true vocation. The Custom House also gives us an idea of the low status of a creative writer in colonial New England. The Custom House also gives us an idea of the low status of a creative writer in colonial New England. So, what did Custom House tell us? Okay, the Custom House also gives us an idea of the low status of a creative writer in colonial New England. Hawthorne evokes the hostile spirit of his Puritan ancestors towards himself in memorable words. What is he? Murmurs one grey shadow of my forefathers to the other. A writer of storybooks. Okay, the Custom House also gives us an idea of the low status of a creative writer in colonial New England. Hawthorne evokes the hostile spirit of his Puritan ancestor towards himself in memorable words. What is he? Murmurs one grey shadow of my forefathers to the other. A writer of storybooks. What kind of business in life, what mode of glorifying God or being serviceable to mankind in his day and generation may that be? Why, the degenerate fellow might as well have been a fiddler. Okay, what kind of a business in life, what mode of glorifying God or being serviceable to mankind in his day and generation may that be? Why, the degenerate fellow might as well have been a fiddler. That is Scarlet Letter in page 23. Okay, what kind of a business in life, what mode of glorifying God or being serviceable to mankind in his day and generation may that be? Why, the degenerate fellow might as well have been a fiddler. Okay, here is the Scarlet Letter, page 23, description already given. Okay, here it is very important, so you can note down in your notebooks. Okay, what kind of business in life, what mode of glorifying God or being serviceable to mankind in his day and generation Okay, so what kind of business in life? What else or business in life? What mode of glorifying God? Okay, so which work will give satisfaction to God, or being serviceable to mankind in his day and generation may that be? Why the degenerate fellow might as well have been a fiddler. The Scarlet Letter, page 23. Then come to the next para. The custom house is also remarkable because it is an affirmation of Hawthorne credo as a romancer. Okay, so here it is the Hawthorne's credential as a romancer in the custom house. Okay, he uses the image of moonlight in a room in order to convey the peculiar nature of a romancer's imagination. Okay, so he uses the image of moonlight in a room in order to convey the peculiar nature of a romancer's imagination. The ordinary tables, chairs, and carpets in a familiar room are transferred by moonlight into something strange, dark, and a familiar room are transferred by moonlight into something strange, dark, and mysterious. Okay, so he imagined moonlight in a normal room. Okay, the ordinary tables, chairs, and carpets in a familiar room are transferred by moonlight into something strange, dark, and mysterious. The mundane and humdrum objects are transformed and made to convey our deeply felt emotions and attitudes. Okay, see how Nathaniel Hawthorne changed everything into imaginary beautiful things, some mundane or humdrum objects. Okay, some mundane and humdrum objects means here it is the ordinary objects. Okay, here it is the ordinary objects. So what do you mean by mundane and humdrum objects? Here it is the mundane and humdrum objects means some ordinary objects. Okay, some ordinary objects are transformed and made to convey our deeply felt emotions and attitudes. The creativity of a writer does not lie in a photographic reproduction of the surface aspects of humdrum reality. Okay, the creativity of a writer does not lie in a photographic reproduction of the surface aspects of humdrum reality, but in his capacity to penetrate below the surface and bring out obliquely the dark truths lying buried in our consciousness. Okay, so here the humdrum or mundane objects, the creativity of a writer does not lie in a photographic reproduction of the surface aspects of humdrum reality, but in his capacity to penetrate below the surface and bring out obliquely the dark truths lying buried in our consciousness. Okay, so keep subscribing, like, and share my channel, and keep watching the video till end. You will get some NET questions and torment examination questions also. I will describe everything, and have a good day to see my video. Okay, so to penetrate below the surface and bring out obliquely and dark truths lying buried in our consciousness. To cite an example, one could refer to Hawthorne's description of the Scarlet Letter that he found in the custom house, and out of curiosity he put it on his breast. It seemed to me, the reader may smile but must not doubt my words, it seemed to me then that I experienced a sensation not altogether physical, yet almost so as a burning heat, and as if the letter were not of red cloth but red hot iron. I shuddered and involuntarily let it fall upon the floor. It has to be noted that the phrase red hot iron is a vivid reflection of the awful intensity of suffering associated with the Scarlet Letter. So you can write in page 40 to 49, it has to be noted that the phrase red hot iron is a vivid reflection of the awful intensity of suffering associated with the Scarlet Letter. So what do you mean by awful intensity of suffering? Means it is a very sad suffering or stress. Okay, there is no wonder that the Scarlet Letter ceases to be a simple letter. It becomes a dark and mysterious symbol of a fallen woman's suffering and redemption in colonial New England. Okay? It becomes a dark and mysterious symbol of a fallen woman's suffering and redemption in colonial New England. Some critics are of view that the custom house is not originally related to the text of the Scarlet Letter. Okay? Some critics are of view that the custom house is not originally related to the text of the Scarlet Letter. This is however not true. We learn from that Hawthorne was trying to develop a native tradition of American fiction in which the natural and the marvelous are artistically fused. So Hawthorne was trying to develop a native tradition of American fiction in which the natural and the marvelous are artistically fused. The focus is mostly on the strange, the marvelous and supernatural, but they are woven in such a manner that the authenticity of the narrative is firmly reinforced. The details that are given about the recovery of the Scarlet Letter, the manuscript of the ancient survivor coup, and the freedom of the writer to expand imaginatively the outline of the narrative are meant to make us believe in the strange and extraordinary tale. If the romancer is not able to make the reader shed his disbelief and make the tale credible, he fails as a creative writer. Okay? If the romancer is not able to make the reader shed his disbelief and make the tale credible, he fails as a creative writer. Okay? So how a writer will be a creative writer? If the romancer is not able to make the reader shed his disbelief and make the tale credible, he fails as a creative writer. So Hawthorne was a creative writer. Hawthorne's credo as a romancer committed to underlying reality, the truth of the human heart, is very perceptibly expressed in these words. Then, at such an hour and with the scene before him, if a man sitting all alone cannot dream strange things and make them look like truth, he need never to write romances. In other words, the romance as developed by Hawthorne is not purely imaginary. It creates a strange world in which both reality and romance, the natural and the marvelous, the past and the future are inextricably fused. Okay? So then the threshold of the narrative. So what do you mean by threshold? Threshold means the starting point. Okay? So what do you mean by threshold? Threshold means the starting point. Okay? The threshold means the starting point of the story. Okay, the starting point. So the threshold of the narrative. Chapters 1 to 4 constitute the threshold of the narrative and introduce us to three of the main characters of the story. There is Hester Prynne, accused of adultery, who is, here it is Hester Prynne, the picture of Hester Prynne. Okay, you can see the picture of Hester Prynne. Here it is Hester Prynne. Hester Prynne. Okay, so you can see the picture, that is Hester Prynne, accused of adultery, who is brought out of the prison and made to stand at the scaffold of the pillory along with her infant. The Scarlet Letter A, signifying an adulteress, is fixed on her bosom, and the men and women of Boston look down upon her and ridicule her. Okay, so here the Scarlet Letter A signifies an adulteress. Okay, so who was the adulteress in the story? Here it is the Hester Prynne was an adulteress, is fixed on her bosom, and the men and women of Boston look down upon her and ridicule her. Okay, so the men and women of Boston looked down upon her, and he was in a scaffold of pillory along with her infant. He was in the middle of a position in the market of Boston market, and the men and women of Boston looked down upon her as she was an adulteress. Okay, so she was an adulteress and ridicule her. There is also an old man, a stranger amidst the hostile crowd, who recognizes her as his wife. Okay, so there is also an old man, a stranger amidst the hostile crowd. Okay, so in the crowd there is a old man who recognizes her as his wife. He recognized the Hester Prynne as his wife. When Hester goes back to the prison, her husband meets her and wants to know who her lover is. Okay, when Hester goes back to the prison, her husband meets her. Her husband meets her and wants to know who her lover is. Hester is prepared to suffer alone and does not reveal the name of the lover. Okay, so Hester is prepared to suffer alone. He was in very much shock, and he wanted to suffer alone and does not reveal the name of her lover. Her husband admits that he has been unfair to her because an old man like him had married a beautiful young woman. Her husband admits that he has been unfair to her. Okay, her husband admits that he has been unfair to her because an old man like him had married a beautiful young woman. Okay, her husband admits that he has been unfair to her because an old man like him had married a beautiful young woman. He has, however, not been able to condone her lover because he has hurt the husband and deprived him of manly honor and dignity. Okay, he has, however, not been able to condone her lover because he has hurt the husband and deprived him of manly honor and dignity. There is also the young priest Arthur Dimmesdale, who urges Hester to name her lover before the community so that both the sinners can be made to repent together for their sin. Okay, so here Arthur Dimmesdale was a priest. Okay, so Arthur Dimmesdale who urged Hester to name her lover before the community so that both the sinners can be made to repent together of their sin. When she refuses to do so, the priest cannot help commenting, "Wondrous strength and generosity of a woman's heart." Okay, so Arthur Dimmesdale declared, wondrous strength and generosity of a woman's heart, pointing towards Hester Prynne. It is through this brief but poignant utterance on the part of the priest that the writer is able to evoke our sympathy for the fallen woman. Okay, so it is through this brief but poignant utterance on the part of the priest that the writer is able to evoke our sympathy for the fallen woman. Standing near the scaffold, Hester is able to recollect her early life in Old England, the poverty of her parents, the face of her father and her mother, and lastly her marriage to an old scholarly man who did not bring her warmth and joy of conjugal life. Okay, so standing near the scaffold, Hester is able to recollect her early life in Old England. He remembered all those things which she faced once upon a time. Okay, so she recollect her early life in Old England, the poverty of her parents, the face of her father and mother, and lastly her marriage to an old scholarly man who did not bring her warmth and joy of conjugal life. So what do you mean conjugal life? Conjugal life means that is married life. Okay, here it is conjugal life means your married life. Okay, conjugal means the married life. The focus of the narrative is definitely on the early life and destiny of Hester, who is first trapped into a loveless marriage and later into adultery in a city where she has arrived as an immigrant. Okay, the focus of the narrative is definitely on the early life and destiny of Hester, who is first trapped into a loveless marriage. So what is the focus of the narrative? The focus of the narrative is definitely on the early life and destiny of the Hester Prynne, who is first trapped into a loveless marriage and the woman later on into adultery in a city where she has arrived as an immigrant. There is no one in the alien city to offer her consolation and hope. These opening chapters locate the story in a specific time and place. The scaffold of the pillory is situated in the market of mid-17th century Boston in New England. Men and women who throng the market are stern Puritans and they regard Hester as the fallen woman. According to the law of the land, a sinner in those days, especially a woman, was subjected to the extreme penalty of death. Okay, so according to the law of the land, a sinner in those days, especially a woman, was subjected to the extreme penalty of death. A man who is present near the scaffold tells Hester's husband that the authorities have been kind to her and, keeping in mind her youth, have inflicted a light punishment on her. There is an unmistakable note of irony in the words that are uttered, but in their great mercy and tenderness of heart, they have doomed Mistress Prynne to stand only a space of 3 hours on the platform of the pillory, and thereafter, for the remainder of her natural life, to wear a mark of shame upon her bosom. Okay. So, the narrative of the Scarlet Letter encompasses not only incidents and dialogues but symbols and images as well. The action is also followed by commentary and reflection. In the very first chapter, Hawthorne mentions that the Puritan utopia that the early settlers wanted to establish in the New World also made provision for a prison and a cemetery. Now, the action is followed by commentary and reflection. In the very first chapter, Hawthorne mentioned that the Puritan utopia that the early settlers wanted to establish the New World also made provision for a prison and a cemetery. There is also the rose bush standing near the gate of the prison. The rose bush reminds the reader of Anne Hutchinson, who was a heretic, and for her dissent she was put in the prison. Okay, the rose bush reminds the reader of Anne Hutchinson, who was a heretic, and for her dissent she was put in the prison. Later on, the church authorities exiled her from New England. What Hawthorne is trying to suggest is that Hester is as much non-conformist and a radical as Anne Hutchinson was. This idea has been expressed briefly through the phrase the sainted Anne Hutchinson. Both of these characters have consciously rebelled against Puritanist dogma and ethics. Okay, so both the characters. So who are the both of the characters? That is Anne Hutchinson's and Hester Prynne have consciously rebelled against Puritanist dogma and ethics. Puritanist dogma and ethics. Okay. In the second chapter, when Hester stands at the scaffold with the child in her arms, she is compared to Madonna and her child. Okay. In the second chapter, when Hester stands at the scaffold with the child in her arms, she is compared to Madonna and her child. The use of such an intensely Catholic image on the part of the Hawthorne shows that he is largely free from Puritan bigotry and intolerance. Okay. So, in the second chapter, when Hester stands at the scaffold with the child in her arms, she is compared to Madonna and her child. The use of such an intensely Catholic image on the part of the Hawthorne shows that he is largely free from the Puritan bigotry and intolerance, and she was a Catholic influencer. Okay, so she believed in intensely Catholic image. Okay, so here then reading the text, here it is Hester and Pearl. Okay, who was Pearl? Pearl is the 7-year-old daughter of Arthur Dimmesdale, the priest. You have also to make a note of the fact that the names of the main characters have a strange resonance. For example, Hester's husband assumes the name of Roger Chillingworth. Okay, so who was the husband of Hester Prynne? Hester's husband assumes the name of Roger Chillingworth. There is something chilling, cold and inhuman about his pursuit of his wife's lover. The guilty priest is Arthur Dimmesdale, who is dedicated pastor, but there is something dim, something fading about him. He is also in the habit of keeping his hand on his heart. It is a gesture that indicates his divided self and also the turmoil in his heart to confess or not to confess. Okay. Pearl has the ring of a beautiful and esoteric object of nature. Okay, Pearl has the ring of a beautiful and esoteric object of nature, and Hester has the oriental and esoteric association of the biblical Esther, who was a dark, beautiful and mysterious queen. Pearl has the ring of a beautiful and esoteric object of nature, and Hester has the oriental and esoteric association of the biblical Esther, who was dark, beautiful and mysterious queen. So who was Pearl? Pearl has the ring of beautiful and esoteric object esoteric object of nature, and Hester has the oriental and exotic association of the biblical Esther, who was a dark, beautiful and mysterious queen. There is no wonder that the scarlet letter A that has been fixed on Hester's bosom has been rendered in a flamboyantly fashionable and artistic mode, while to savage Indians it appears like a badge of distinction and excellence. The women of Boston regarded as it is the work of brazen hussy and rude defiance of Puritan orthodoxy and conformity. So while to savage Indians it appears like a badge of distinction and excellence, the women of Boston regard it as the work of brazen hussy. It was like the work of brazen hussy and a rude defiance of Puritan orthodoxy and conformity. The rude defiance of Puritan orthodoxy and conformity and the brazen hussy. It was the work of a brazen hussy. The sense of beauty that Hester possesses does not at all agree with the Spartan simplicity of men and women in colonial New England. There is something exotic and colorful about Hester. There is also something oriental about her. Her sense of beauty and passion make her look like a pagan goddess. Okay, there is also something oriental about her. There is something exotic and colorful about Hester. Okay, so Hester possesses does not at all agree with the Spartan simplicity. The sense of beauty of Hester possesses does not at all agree with the Spartan simplicity of men and women in colonial New England. There is something exotic and colorful about Hester. There is also something oriental about her. Her sense of beauty and passion make her look like a pagan goddess. Okay, what are the complications in this story? Chapter 5 to 11 constitute an important stage in the narrative in which our attention is focused first on Hester and Pearl and later on complex relationship between Arthur Dimmesdale, the guilty priest, and Roger Chillingworth, the physician who clings to him like a leech. Okay, the physician who clings to him like a leech. As you know, the leech sucks the blood of a person or an animal. So like that, the Roger Chillingworth, the physician who clings to Hester Prynne as a leech. After her release from the prison, Hester goes to lonely cottage outside Boston and leads to secluded life. In those days, a lonely young woman could only survive through her needlework. There is no other profession open to her in colonial New England. It is through her hard work that Hester is able to earn her bread and bring up her child. Okay, it is through her hard work that Hester is able to earn her bread and bring up her child. She dresses herself according to the Puritanic mode of somber and grave attire, but her lovely child Pearl is dressed in gorgeous and flamboyant apparel. Okay, she dresses herself according to the Puritanic mode of somber and grave attire. Okay, she dresses herself according to the Puritanic mode of somber and grave attire, but her lovely child Pearl is dressed in gorgeous and flamboyant apparel. Okay, Hester is able to earn her bread and bring up her child. She dresses herself according to the Puritanic mode of somber and grave attire, but her lovely child Pearl is dressed in gorgeous and flamboyant apparel. It has also been pointed out earlier there is something oriental and exotic about Hester's natural taste for the gorgeous and the flamboyant. Her submission to an austere and Puritanic mode of dressing is half-hearted. At heart, she is oriental and loves what is flamboyant and gorgeous. She is an alien in colonial New England. It is no wonder that both the mother and the child live a secluded life, and even the children of the town scorned them in their hearts, and not unfrequently reviled them with their tongues. Hester loves Pearl, but she is also tormented by her awkward questions. Hester loves Pearl, but she was also tormented by her awkward questions. Okay, sometimes she begins to wonder if Pearl is the child of a demon. Okay, sometimes she begins to wonder if Pearl is a child of a demon. Her lovely exterior and resplendent attire cannot hide the terrible inquisitiveness of her mind. Her lovely exterior and resplendent attire cannot hide the terrible inquisitiveness of her mind. Later on, Hester goes to the governor's house along with Paul. It is a very significant point in the narrative. After that, Hester goes to governor's house along with Paul. Both the church and the state of the New England are unanimous in persecuting Hester. There is a proposal to separate the mother from the child because a fallen woman is not supposed to be a good mother. Hester, however, opposes the proposal vehemently and urges Arthur Dimmesdale to speak on her behalf. Her words to the priest have a contemporary ring even for a reader of our time. Speak for me, thou knowest, for thou hast sympathies which these men lack. Thou knowest what is in my heart and what are mother's rights, and how much the stronger they are when that mother has bought her and the scarlet letter. Okay, what are mother's right and how much the stranger they are when the mother has bought her and the scarlet letter. It is clear that Hester is asserting the mother's right at the governor's house, where she has to confront single-handed the hostile prejudices of male society in colonial New England. It is clear that Hester is asserting the mother's rights at the governor's house. Okay, it is clear that Hester is asserting the mother's rights at the governor's house, where she has to confront single-handed the hostile prejudices of male society in colonial New England. It is clear that Hester is asserting the mother's rights at the governor's house, where she has to confront single-handed the hostile prejudices of male society in colonial New England. It is clear that Hester is asserting the mother's right at the governor's house, where she has to confront single-handed the hostile prejudices of male society in colonial New England. Okay, so Hester is asserting the mother's right at the governor's house, where she has to confront single-handed the hostile prejudices of male society in colonial New England. It has also to be noted that she is affirming the rights of a fallen woman to keep and bring up her child in a male-dominated society, where both the church and the state marginalized such women and rendered them utterly powerless. You can easily imagine how forward-looking the almost prophetic the assertion of a fallen woman's mother rights are in the Scarlet Letter. Arthur Dimmesdale defends vigorously Hester's right to bring up her child, and his vehemence creates a suspicion in Roger Chillingworth's mind. His reaction is brief: "You speak, my friend, with a strange earnestness," but it shows a strong doubt in his mind pertaining to the exact relationship between Hester and Arthur Dimmesdale. There is no wonder that from this point onwards Roger Chillingworth, the physician, is preoccupied with the priest's health and the state of his mind. He begins to stay in the priest's house and keeps a constant watch over him. The people of Boston come to note that the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale, like many other personages of especial sanctity in all ages of Christian world, was haunted either by Satan himself or Satan's emissary in the guise of old Roger Chillingworth. Okay, so the Roger Chillingworth was very cunning, and the people of Boston come to note that the Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale, like many other personages of especial sanctity in all ages of Christian world, was haunted either by Satan himself or Satan's emissary in the guise of old Roger Chillingworth. This diabolical agent had the divine permission for a season to burrow into the clergyman's intimacy and to plot against his soul. Okay, so the Satan himself or Satan's emissary in the guise of old Roger Chillingworth. This diabolical agent had the divine permission for a season to burrow into the clergyman's intimacy and to plot against his soul. There is no wonder that Roger Chillingworth is overjoyed when she sneaks into the priest who is sleeping and sees a sign on his chest. We are not told what the sign exactly is, but it is clear that the rest of the narrative will focus on the drama of sin and redemption going on his priest's soul. He will either confess his sin and save his soul, or he will be tempted by the devil and remain unredeemed, unrepentant. The priest is very much disturbed at the inquisitive vigil of the physician and goes out of his house and almost in a trance to confess his guilt and save his soul. At the governor's house, Hester also meets Mistress Hibbins, who is a witch. Okay, at the governor's house, Hester also meets Mistress Hibbins, who is a witch, and who invites her to come to the forest and meet the black man of the forest, that is devil. Okay, so Hester replies that she would have done it if she had been deprived of her daughter Pearl. Okay, Hester replies that she would have done it if she had been deprived of her daughter Pearl. It is Pearl, both her innocence as well as her inquisitiveness, that saves Hester from the snares of the devil. Hester's confrontation with Mistress Hibbins creates the atmosphere of mid-17th century New England, when Puritans literally believed in witches that tempted men and women and acted as the agents and emissaries of devil. Okay, the witches who were the tempted men and women and acted as agents and emissaries of devil in 17th century. That's the Puritan concept. The word leech refers to the physician Roger Chillingworth, both in literal and metaphorical sense. The physicians in those primitive days used to bleed the patients and through the process cured them. In a metaphorical sense, leech means a blood-sucking creature that clings to one's skin and sucks all blood. The image of leech aptly suggests Roger Chillingworth's ferocious cruelty and hatred towards Arthur Dimmesdale, whom he suspects of having turned the husband into a cuckold. As an injured and humiliated husband, the physician pretends to be a friend of the priest, but at bottom he is an implacable enemy. Okay, his only joy is to keep on tempting and tormenting the priest till the end of the narrative. It is a painful consciousness of being honored by the physician that stares Arthur Dimmesdale into his midnight adventure. Okay, so Arthur Dimmesdale took a adventurous step in midnight in the story. Here it is a picture, the leech and is the peasant. Okay, the leech and his peasant. Then a turning point comes. Chapter 12 marks a turning point in the tale, and it also foreshadows the climax in chapter 23, titled The Revelation of the Scarlet Letter, in which the priest overcomes his agitation and fear of social disgrace and confesses his relationship with Hester and Pearl. It has also to be noted that the most crucial action in the Scarlet Letter takes place near the scaffold of the pillory in the market. The spot thus comes to acquire a kind of sanctity and mystery. It is linked with the Hester's bold confession of her sin at the beginning of the tale and with the priest's confession and acceptance of Hester and Pearl towards the end. The significance of chapter 12 lies in the fact that it shows the priest's willingness to confess his sin of adultery. The significance of chapter 12 lies in the fact that it shows the priest's willingness to confess his sin of adultery. He is, however, still not fully ready for an honest confession before the Puritan community of Boston. He is, however, still not fully ready for an honest confession before the Puritan community of Boston. He is afraid of facing public ridicule and losing his face before the community. He is afraid of facing public ridicule and losing his face before the community. It is due to his factor that he lets out a loud shriek at midnight. He has yet to acquire the courage and fortitude to confess his sin before the community and face the consequences of his fiction. Okay, it is due to the factor that he lets out a loud shriek at midnight. He has yet to acquire the courage and fortitude to confess his sin before the community and face the consequences of his fiction. He has not yet reached the stage of growth that Hester had reached at the beginning of the tale. The priest is in such a disturbed state of mind when he stands near the scaffold of the pillory and there is a strange dazzling light that illuminates the whole sky that he notices the latter etched boldly in the sky. It seems to the priest that his guilt, long buried in his heart, has been projected all over the sky. We also hear at the critical moment of the sceptical voice of a narrator of the tale. The commentary of the sceptical narrator is trenchantly expressed in the following words. In such a case, it could only with a system of highly disordered mental state. When a man rendered morbidly self-contemplative by long, intense and secret pain had extended his egotism over the whole expanse of nature until the firmament itself should appear no more than a fitting pace for his soul's history and fate. What the narrator is trying to say is that the reader must be able to look at the priest in an objective and balanced manner and realize that the suppression of dark truth, that is the sin of adultery, has rendered the priest morbid and sickly. He could neither face the Puritan community in Boston with courage and fortitude as Hester has done earlier, nor come to the terms of his own self. There is no doubt that the priest's egotism and self-love are morbid and sickly, and he has a long way to go before he attains the equanimity and courage to go through the ordeal of a public confession of his sin. Yet he has taken an initial step towards the stage, and as such one can safely affirm that chapter 12 constitutes a sort of dress rehearsal for the final public confession on the part of the priest. Then chapter 13 and 14 are also preoccupied with the tangled relationship between Arthur Dimmesdale, Hester and Roger Chillingworth. Hester's life of labor and sacrifice has won the respect of the Puritan community in Boston. The narrator's commentary on his transformation is revealing. She was self-ordained, a sister of mercy. We may rather say the world's heavy hand so ordained her, when neither the world nor she looked forward to this result. The latter was a symbol of her calling. Such helpfulness was found in her, so much power to do and power to sympathize, and many people refused to interpret the Scarlet A by its original signification. They said that it meant able, so strong was Hester Prynne with a woman's strength. The narrator's contention is that there has been a change in the Puritan community's perception of Hester. They have nearly forgotten her as an adulteress, and now they regard her as a sister of mercy who has been helpful to the most poor and most needy women of Boston. Okay, so they have nearly forgotten her as an adulteress, and now they regarded her as a sister of mercy who has been helpful to the most poor and the most needy women of Boston. The letter A on her bosom has ceased to be a symbol of punishment and persecution. It has now become the cross of Hester and has been sanctified and hallowed by her life as a compassionate sister of charity. There is no wonder that while Arthur Dimmesdale is still hesitant, Hester takes a decisive step in chapter 14. She tells Roger Chillingworth that he has not been fair to Arthur Dimmesdale. He has been founding him like a devil. You tread behind this every footstep. You are beside him, sleeping and waking. You search his thoughts. You burrow and rankle in his heart. Your claws itch on his life, and you cause him to die daily a living death, and still he knows you not. In a situation like this, he has no choice but to be loyal to her lover. She would tell him that Roger Chillingworth was her husband, and he has been plotting to catch the priest's soul and trap him into evil. She also urges her husband to be fair in his dealing with the priest, forgive and leave his further retribution to the power that claims it. It has to be noted, however, that forgiveness and mercy are alien to Roger Chillingworth, and he says that it is his fate and doom to trap the soul of the man who has cuckolded him into sin and damnation. He will go his way, and she can go her own way. Then temptation in the forest. Chapter 15 to 19, the action of the tale to the forest outside the town. There is a kind of ambiguity about the forest. The Puritans of mid-17th century colonial New England believed that the forest was the abode of the black man, that is devil. You may recall that after Hester leaves the governor house with her daughter Pearl in her custody, Mistress Evans, the witch, invites her to join the black man and his companions in the forest. The scenes that occur in the forest in these chapters are, however, mostly full of joy and happiness. While Paul plays near the brook, Hester and Arthur Dimmesdale get a chance to talk freely. The priest tells her what has been disturbing him. Happy are you, Hester, that wear the scarlet letter openly upon your bosom. Mine burns in secret. Hester is deeply upset at the agony of her lover and tells him, that old man, the physician, he whom they call Roger Chillingworth, he was my husband. The priest is extremely unhappy and tells her Hester that he will never forgive her. He, however, loves her so much that his anger subsides, but his anger against the physician is unrelenting. He says that Roger Chillingworth has betrayed the trust of a friend. He has been mean and treacherous. He has also violated the sanctity of human heart. Hester puts a sharp question to the priest. Does the universe lie within the compass of yonder town, which only a little time ago was but a leaf-strewn desert? As lonely as this around us, whither leads yonder forest track? Whither leads yonder forest track? Jester is able to persuade the priest to run away from the small city of Boston and go either to Europe, that is old world, or into the wilderness that is widespread into the new world. Once he is inside the wilderness, he will attain freedom, the freedom to live along with Hester and Pearl. In other words, Hester urges the priest to escape from Boston and begin life afresh. In other words, Hester urges the priest to escape from Boston and begin life afresh. It is clear that for Hester, the forest is not only the abode of the black man, but a sort of utopia where the priest will attain supreme happiness and bliss. The wilderness of the new world seems to be more tempting to Hester than the cities of the old world. Chapter 18, appropriately titled A Flood of Sunshine. Hester is so much thrilled at the prospect of attaining happiness along with her lover and daughter that she throws the scarlet letter away, removes her cap, and lets her hair fall over her shoulders. The narrators comment on the transformation of Hester from being a sister of charity to an exquisitely beautiful young woman is telling indeed. A crimson flush was glowing on her cheek that had long been so pale. So here the narrator Nathaniel Hawthorne wonderfully described Hester Prynne's face. Beautiful young woman is telling indeed. A crimson flush was glowing on her cheek that had long been so pale. Her sex, her youth, and whole richness of her beauty came back from what men call the irrecoverable past and clustered themselves with her maiden hope and a happiness before unknown within the magic circle of this hour. The moment of ecstasy for Hester, however, does not last long. Necessity is explained in the form of the stand taken by her daughter Pearl. She refuses to accept her mother without her cap and without the scarlet letter restored on her bosom. In chapter 19, Hester is forced to act as Pearl wants her to. She puts on her cap and her rich hair is suitably confined. She also puts on the scarlet letter on her bosom. The focus of the narrator in the chapter is that Hester can escape from the wiles of Roger Chillingworth, but she cannot escape from the reality that Pearl embodies. That is her scene in colonial New England. The dream of freedom and hope that is generated in the forest is sharply negated by the scarlet letter, the cross that Hester has to bear on her bosom, and the terrible burden of guilt and the priest has to bear within his heart. There is no wonder that the priest eventually comes to regard Hester suffer in the forest as a kind of temptation of devil. There is no wonder that the priest eventually comes to regard Hester suffer in the forest as a kind of temptation of devil. Then towards the climax, chapter 20 to 24 mark the last phase of narrative and the events move inexorably towards the climax, public confession by the priest on the scaffold of the pillory and the acceptance of his relationship with Hester and Pearl. The romantic reunion of Hester and Dimmesdale in the idyllic sanctuary of the forest energizes the priest and he returns to the town a man reborn. There is a feverish rush of ideas in the mind, and he looks forward to the plan made by Hester. There has been, however, a change in their plan. Instead of escaping into the vast American wilderness, it has been decided to return to the old world. As the ship is expected to leave on the fourth day, the priest starts writing the election sermon, which he will deliver as his parting message to the Puritan community in New England. While the priest gets busy in drafting the election sermon, he also becomes aware of many contrary, dark impulses in his mind. While returning to the town, he has an impulse to utter a certain blasphemy to one of his fellow priests. He also treats casually the eldest female member of his parish and looks down upon the distant, the youngest female in his parish. In other words, he does not behave as a responsible and a dedicated priest. There is no wonder that Dimmesdale is at last able to realize that in some insidious way he has been tempted by devil. There has been so much impiety within him, and he cannot help crying to himself, "What is it that haunts and tempts me thus? Am I mad? Did I make contract with him in the forest and sign it with my blood?" It is clear that Dimmesdale begins to feel that he has been tempted by devil in a most seductive mode. It is this realization that gives him strength to face the consequences of his sin and not to run away from the Boston. On the election day, the whole town wears a gala of festive look. For a change, the people are in happy mood. They are going to celebrate the assumption of office by a new governor and also to listen to election day sermon by their popular priest Arthur Dimmesdale. The narrator also draws our attention to the rich heritage of New England Puritans, but we perhaps disaggregate the grey and stable tinge which undoubtedly characterize the mood and manners of the age. The persons now in the marketplace of Boston had not been born into inheritance of Puritan gloom. They are the Englishmen whose England, viewed as one great mass, would appear to have been as stately, magnificent and joyous as the world has ever witnessed. In chapter 21, entitled The New England Holiday, the narrator has tried to recapture the exuberance and jollity of the Elizabethan England. Apart from the inhabitants of Boston, some sailors and a few Indians are also present among the crowd. There is a procession that moves towards the scaffold of the pillory. While Dimmesdale the priest is in the procession along with magistrates and fellow priests, Hester and Pearl are among the crowd gathering around the scaffold. While Dimmesdale the priest is in the procession along with magistrates and fellow priests, Hester and Pearl among the crowd gathering around the scaffold. So here you can see the picture, that is the infant and Hester Prynne and the prisoner, and here is the marketplace. Dimmesdale election day sermon is straight from the hat and audience is thrilled. The people are however shocked to find that priest begins to took pale and haggard after the sermon. He has been drained of all strength. He also looks like a dying man, as he does not have much time left at his disposal. He urges Hester and Pearl to join him at the scaffold. He also makes a frank confession, at last, I stand up on the spot where 7 years since I should have stood here with this woman whose arm, more than the little strength wherewith I have crept hitherward, sustained me at his dreadful moment from grovelling down upon my face. Page number 305. After Dimmesdale makes his confession and owns Hester and Pearl, Hester comes forward to help the collapsing priest. In the words of narrator, Hester partly raised him and supported his head against her bosom. This is a moment that stuns Roger Chillingworth, because his plot of revenge against the priest fails miserably, and he is seen with a blank, dull countenance, out of which life seemed to have departed. The Scarlet Letter is such a rich romantic tale that it is simultaneously a drama of sin and redemption and a moving love story. The climax at the scaffold of the pillory marks a fitting end both of the spiritual drama of sin and redemption and a heartwarming love story. The lovers are united briefly but unforgettably. near the scaffold. There is no wonder that the scaffold comes to acquire a strange kind of awe and mystery. It is the most hallowed spot in New England. Then the last chapter, the conclusion, is a kind of postscript to the main body of the historical romance. The narrator takes over and offers various possibilities to explain Dimmesdale's death on the scaffold. You may recall that the bears his bosom before the revelation of the Scarlet letter. Here is you can see the picture, the death of Dimmesdale. He dies in Hester's arms. Some people see the letter A imprinted on his heart, while Hester has the Scarlet letter A on her dress. Dimmesdale has it over his hat. Some people regard it as the result of medicines given by Roger Chillingworth. Some are of the view that it is the result of self-torture inflicted by the priest. Some people are of the view that they did not see anything imprinted on the priest's heart. What the narrator is using here is, according to F.O. Matheson, the device of multiple choice. There is a certain mystery and awe associated with the priest's death on the scaffold, and it is not possible to explain it in clear-cut, rational terms. This seems to be the idea behind the narrator's use of the device of multiple choice. What is clear, however, it is fact that Dimmesdale dies in glory, but Roger Chillingworth rebels like an uprooted weed and dies a year after. Dimmesdale dies in glory, but Roger Chillingworth rebels like an uprooted weed and dies a year after. This is the Dimmesdale dies in glory, but Roger Chillingworth rebels like an uprooted weed and dies a year after. Dies in glory, but Roger Chillingworth rebels like an uprooted weed and dies year after. He tries, however, to atone for his sin by giving all his wealth to Paul, who has been the daughter of the man he hated the most. Hester and Paul disappear from Boston and go back to some country in Europe. While Paul is happily married to a noble in the old world, Hester returns to her cottage in New England. For her, the cottage outside the Boston has become sacred. She resumes her life as a sister of charity and puts on the Scarlet letter A on her bosom. The narrator says, never afterwards did it quit her bosom. Women of the town come to Hester for help and advice. They also want to know why they were so raised and what was the remedy. Hester looks upon the Scarlet letter on her bosom and replies. She assured them too of her firm belief that at some brighter period, when the world should have grown ripe for it, in heaven's own time a new truth would be revealed. In order to establish the whole relation between man and woman on a surer ground of mutual happiness. You may recall that at the beginning of the Scarlet letter there is a sceptical reference to the utopia that the Puritans wanted to establish the new world. But at the end of the romance, the narrator makes a passionate affirmation that man-woman relationship would be completely recast in the future. This is a kind of utopia that would be established in which man-woman relationship would be based on natural impulse and women would be neither raised nor miserable. They would also not be forced into a loveless marriage with an old woman. The ambiguity of the narrative in the Scarlet letter is brought out by the fact that it is a both critique and affirmation of utopia. While a utopia based on Puritan ideals is negated, a utopia based on the ideal of equity-based man-woman relationship is affirmed. It is undeniable that the Elizabethan and the New England past and the glorious future are artistically fused in the tale that is narrated in the Scarlet letter. One could also describe Hawthorne's historical romance as a dialogue between the past and the future. Then let us sum up. The most dramatic scenes in the Scarlet letter revolve around the scaffold of the pillory in Boston. It is scaffold that bears witness to Hester's confession of the sin of adultery. It is near the scaffold of the Dimmesdale has his midnight adventure. In chapter 12, it is near the same scaffold that Dimmesdale makes his final public confession and saves his soul. Hester's suffering and redemption largely take place in the cottage outside Boston. Her hard work to earn her bread, her bringing up Pearl as a single parent, her service to poor and needy, especially the women, earn her the respect and love of the Puritan community in New England. The scarlet letter A on her bosom ceases to be a badge of shame. It is transformed into something holy and pious, and the people look upon it with awe and wonder. There is no wonder that the letter A also signs on the grave where Hester and Dimmesdale are buried side by side. It seems to embody both sin and redemption, and also the agony and ecstasy of Hester and Dimmesdale. Sin, redemption, and both agony and ecstasy. Here is the main key point. You can write down. Okay. So here it is. It seems somebody both it seems embody both sin and redemption and the agony and ecstasy of Hester and Dimmesdale. The Scarlet Letter is a historical romance that encompasses the glory of the Elizabethan England, the bigotry and intolerance of new settlers in New England, and a brief vision of the future in which man-woman relationship would be based on natural impulses and passion. It is a complex narrative in which the various dimensions of the past and brief but poignant vision of the future are artistically fused. It is a strange work of art in which there is a recurring dialogue between the past and the future. It is both a critique and an affirmation of utopia in mid-19th century American fiction. You may recall that Hawthorne creates a strange world in the Scarlet Letter in which both the actual and imaginary are inextricably dovetailed. Okay, so here are the question. Bring out the significance of the three scaffold scenes in the narrative of the Scarlet Letter. Okay, so you can write the three scaffold scenes in the narrative of the Scarlet Letter. How does Hester defend her mother's rights in the scene at the governor's house? Do you really agree with her? Why does Roger Chillingworth come to stay with Arthur Dimmesdale? Do you think the image of the leech aptly sums up his behavior? Describe critically the action and interaction between Hester and Pearl in the forest. The Scarlet Letter is both critique and an affirmation of utopia. Illustrate your answer with suitable examples from the text. Then examine the Scarlet Letter critically as a love story in which love triumphs over various obstacles. What is the relevance of the introduction, the custom house, to the unfolding of the narrative? Does it really help you in locating the romance novel against the backdrop of colonial New England? Okay, so these are the suggested readings. So all of you know about the Scarlet Letter reading the test, that is block 2 unit 2 already I have discussed. Unit 7 block 2 unit 7 already I have discussed. Please go through my previous videos, and in my coming videos also I will give some description and exam related questions and descriptions also. So thank you viewers, thank you for watching. Please keep subscribe, like and share my channel with your friends. Thank you viewers.